Hi there, this video is an installation guide for installing a Chinese diesel heater on a Citroen relay. So there's quite a lot of installation advice out there already for these heaters, but I couldn't find much specific for a Citroen relay. So just to be clear, Citroen relay in the UK, this is the same as a Peugeot Boxer and Fiat Cato effectively, some differences in engines, but pretty much the same body for the purposes of this. In the US, this is the same as a Ram ProMaster as well. What I'm working on is a 2014 L1H1. Any other year, any other wheelbase height, it's all going to be very similar to this. So as for the heaters themselves, they're basically a Chinese copy of a very well-known heater design. There's a lot of information out there about them, how they work and everything, so they're pretty well established despite having sort of no brand or anything. Provided they're installed correctly, they're pretty much safe to run. In terms of what you can actually buy, pretty much the only difference is the rated power. So these start at 2 kilowatts, most common ones probably 5 kilowatts, and there are some variants at 8 kilowatt as well. So basically you need to make a decision on what form factor, what power that you want for your van. 5 kilowatts is the most common, but from what I've read and from actually seeing it now, 2 kilowatt is pretty much plenty for a van, even for a large wheelbase van. So once you have decided the output that you need, you've got to start looking for where to buy. Most common place being eBay. As of today, there's hundreds and hundreds of listings selling these things. But yeah, the one thing to be careful of is just to check that the listing you're looking at, the advertised dimensions match this picture for which power size you want. Because quite often they might be selling a 2 kilowatt, but really it's a 5 kilowatt, which has been restricted electronically, so its power output is only 2 kilowatt. But personally, for myself, 2 kilowatt I thought would be plenty, and it seems to be fine. And it's quite nice having that really small form factor as well. So, for example, this is the listing that I actually bought. They're all very similar, to be honest. There might be some variations in terms of what accessories they come with. The only two really important things are probably the fuel line and the exhaust muffler. So the fuel line, what you're looking for, the best type, is a narrow nylon type plastic tubing. So this is really narrow diameter, a couple of mils inside. It's like a white nylon sort of plastic, quite stiff. This is the one you want. There are some listings which have a wider vinyl type tubing, which looks much clearer and it's a lot more flexible. This isn't really suitable for these heaters. The only other thing is the exhaust muffler. So as you can see in this picture, it's sort of a straight through muffler. So you can see both the in and out, sort of the in and outlet points are directly in the middle. There are some designs where they'll be to the side, and basically that muffler, it still works, but it creates a bit of back pressure, so the heater might not be working as efficiently. And also it's not as good at dampening noise as this straight through muffler. So only really critical things, that nylon type fuel pipe and also this straight through muffler is recommended. The controller itself, this comes with a rotary dial controller, works absolutely fine. A lot of people upgrade to a digital type controller, which gives you a lot more information. I might do it at some later point, but this works for now, so I'm not going to mess with it too much. As a side note, all the technical recommendations that I'm going to give in this video pretty much have come from watching this guy's channel, Australian chap. He's basically broken down these heaters in tons of detail, and he's got lots and lots of really sound advice on how they work and how to best install them, etc. So definitely check them out, especially on things like routing fuel lines and things like this. So now I'm going to go through all the parts that I bought aside from the actual kit itself. So first up was a turret mounting plate. Basically what this achieves is it seals and keeps all the exhaust pipes, and especially the exhaust fumes, away from kind of the internal layers of the floor. If you're just going straight onto metal, maybe you could get away without this. The kit does come with like sort of a flat mounting plate, but basically my concern was how to effectively seal like the internal floor layers sort of away from the outside road. You could probably DIY something with a bit of sheet metal maybe, but for £20 this turret basically totally bolts in, seals away the floor, and it keeps everything nice and tidy. Yep, that'd be my first recommendation. After that, you basically have a choice. The heater will come with its own fuel tank. You can use this, obviously. What a lot of people do is tap into the vehicle's fuel tank, just for convenience, and having to not deal with a diesel tank in sort of your living space. That's what I'm going to do. And if you're going to do that, you need some kind of standpipe. Yeah, this one was about £10 from China, and this did the job. So notice this also comes with that narrow type sort of nylon fuel pipe. So again, this is the type that you want. So to actually get into the vehicle's fuel tank, you're going to have to remove the sender. And to do this, there's basically a retaining sort of cog on top, and they're a little bit tricky to remove unless you have a specific tool. So probably this is, I think, less than £10, about £9. This would absolutely do the job sort of first time. If you do have some stuff around the house, we did actually manage to sort of put this one together out of I think it's a bearing puller. And that managed to do the job, but to be honest, for £9, £10, you're going to save a lot of time by using this. And basically, by going down this approach, you don't actually need to drop the fuel tank. So in the Citroen relay, you can access the top of the fuel tank from inside the cab quite easily. And then, yeah, providing you can actually get the sender out, you don't need to drop the fuel tank. So I would recommend just buying one of these if you can't make one at home. This one's a bit optional. I've just got some exhaust wrap just to make sure that sort of vulnerable components like the fuel line don't get too hot being right next to the exhaust. For a few pounds, £5, £6, I thought it was worth it, but I know a lot of people don't bother. Some kind of fire sealant. So this is going to go, once everything's in place, this is going to go underneath the van and seal the turret in. I'm probably going to put it between layers, so between the plywood floor and the metal floor of the van. And yeah, basically just the biggest hazard is any kind of fumes, carbon monoxide coming up into the van. So yeah, probably recommend this for a few pounds. Finally, yeah, some kind of smoke carbon monoxide alarm. So for the actual location for the heater itself, I chose this flat area, which is next to the right wheel arch. There's a couple of flat areas around the van you could choose from, I guess. Under this spot, you can actually see there's a pilot hole drilled there, so that's exactly where I've placed the turret. Underneath, you'll see later there's some good clearance as well. You're not sort of hitting into any structural parts or anything underneath, so this spot made sense for me. In the whole design, this is going to be covered away inside a cupboard anyway, so it doesn't matter too much about having it on show. Apart from somewhere a flat area around the back, the only other option, I have found a video actually where someone in the US actually installs it under I think it's the passenger seat, driver's seat, under one of the seats. You could potentially do that, but you'd be cutting away sort of the rubber covering and the sort of sound deadening material and things if you did want to do it there. And this is how it looks from the underside. So although it's quite a large flat area on top, there are these big structural beams underneath, so you haven't actually got that much space to play with. So if you are going to do it here, just make sure you're going through exactly the right spot to not be hitting those ribs or any of this sort of corner structural stuff. For the actual cut, I'd choose an angle grinder, although a jigsaw might be a bit easier. But basically just cut out a circle, ground it down so it's a nice smooth edge, treated it with some Hammerite metal protection paint, and gave it a test, and yep, that was absolutely fine. To install the air intake and exhaust pipe. I just used a combination of some metal self-tapping screws that came with the kit, some angle brackets, and yeah, basically just fixed the air intake under the vehicle and the exhaust and the muffler, just pointing a little bit out the side. So for the exhaust routing, ideally it needs to be sloping gently down the entire run, with the muffler drain hole also pointing down to allow water to drain out. Ideally you also want less than 270 degrees of bends in total, and definitely no sort of sharp 90-degree bends. Again, if you have a look at John MCK's videos, he's got lots of explanation on how best to do this. For installation of the pump and the filter, I chose this sort of alcove, which is just underneath the sliding door. So basically down there, well, already on my van at least, there was an existing sort of bracket which had a sort of bolt on it that could be used. So basically the pump itself is just attached to an angle bracket, which is then bolted to the frame through that. Just using zip ties as well, to make sure that the whole thing doesn't sag too much. With the pump installation, basically two really important things. Make sure the pump and the filter are installed the right way, so there's an arrow on showing direction of flow. Also, the pump needs to be at kind of a 45-degree-ish angle, or at least pointing up a little bit. This is basically due to the bubbles that form inside the tubing, and basically if it's not in an upright angle, these could eventually cause issues inside the pump itself, if it's not able to basically clear these. Yep, so pretty much have it at an upright angle, and have it installed the right way. My only other tip as well would be with these black connecting tubes. Make sure the white plastic tube is pushed into these as far as possible. So this was a bit tricky in the end, a bit of WD-40, and it was able to sort of push in. Basically, you don't want any air gaps within these. They all need to be flush inside next to each other. And again, the channel John MCK, he explains all of this in a lot more detail if you're interested. Another good reason for installing on this side is you avoid the entire exhaust assembly, which is obviously going to get very hot. So you can tuck everything nice and out of the way. In this picture as well, you can see the fuel line going up to the top of the fuel tank. So there is a gap of a couple of centimeters down the side of the fuel tank. So basically I was able to just push this plastic tubing through without having to drill any extra holes or anything to get this routed. So running the fuel line round to the heater itself, basically I was able to make use of, there's like some black plastic clips, which takes care of all the existing sort of cables and pipework. So I was able to use some of them, and then for actually traversing across the van, I just zip tied to a brake line. And yeah, there's not much force on that, and it keeps it all nicely secured. Last couple of points on placing the pump here is there's quite a good way to route the cable from inside. So you can use this sort of box section here to prod a cable through, and then you can come out through this rubber grommet down here. And finally, I'm probably also going to make some kind of shield that's going to sit over this entire area, just to stop any sort of road debris from getting up and damaging the pump. So to access the top of the fuel tank, you've got this inspection hatch just under the passenger bench. So you will need to remove the passenger seats to do this job. Basically, they're held in by these two bolts, which are about 3/4 inch or 19 mil socket size roughly. Once those bolts are out, you'll also need to take this cable off. This cable wasn't actually plugged into anything on my vehicle, but I just had to pull it off from a clip. And then basically the entire seat should be able to push back slightly and then raise off these sort of rear two standoffs, and then you can lift the bench seat out of the way. So at this point you should be able to remove the inspection hatch cover and also another plastic cover to expose the top of the center unit. At this point I would do two things. I would take the filler cap off, just to neutralize the pressure in the tank. We forgot to do this the first time, and there was a positive pressure in the tank, so fuel started coming out as soon as we took the lines out and made a big mess. So take the filler cap off, and also I would disconnect the vehicle battery. So in some instructions it says if you can do this in less than 10 minutes, you don't need to bother with that, but I think it's much safer, and also there's no way we could have done this in less than 10 minutes. Just disconnect the vehicle battery, and then you can spend all day on this job. In case you haven't done this before, on the screen now are some general instructions for disconnecting and reconnecting the battery, just to avoid upsetting the vehicle's computer or the ECU. So now that the fuel tank pressure is equalized and the vehicle battery is disconnected, you can start disconnecting lines on the sender. So basically, at the bottom you've got an electrical connector. So that yellow tab needs to be lifted up, and then if you squeeze the top of the connector quite hard, it basically lifts a small catch at the bottom outwards, and at the same time you can then pull the connector out. The fuel send and return lines, so the yellow on the right is the fuel send line and the green is the fuel return. So basically these clips just need to be pulled on either side and pushed down out the way, and once you've done that, there's two white buttons on either side of the fuel clip. Basically push these down at the same time and lift up, and the fuel line should come clear. There might be a little bit of residual diesel that's going to leak out of that, so just hold it over the spout for a few seconds. Yeah, once those two are out of the way, we just zip tied them up and to the side onto something to keep them out of the way. Finally, on the right at the top is a fuel tank breather pipe. So you can just undo that nut, and then it took a little bit of wiggling, but basically it's just a short, like an inch section of pipe inside. Basically you can just lift that out, and that will be all the connections clear on the sender unit. So hopefully now the top of the sender unit looks something like this. So the next stage is going to be taking off the retaining ring. So this is this sort of big white cog which sits on the outside. So whether you have the tool or you have some other way you're going to try it, basically this just needs to be rotated anti-clockwise to undo. The retainer unit itself is on like a spring, so as the ring comes off, it will move up a few inches, but it should just sit in place by itself. To be honest, this was by far the most difficult part of the job, was getting this retaining ring off. So yeah, again, I'd probably recommend just buying that specific tool for this, because yeah, we spent a long time and trying to impact load it, and yeah, hammers, all sorts of different tools, but eventually we managed to get it off. So once the retaining ring's removed, you should be able to lift the entire sender unit out. There is some captive diesel held in the bottom, so be careful not to tilt it too much or this is going to spill everywhere. Also be careful of the float level sensor, which is on like a metal arm which is sticking forwards. So as you're lifting the sender out, you'll probably need somebody else just to push this out of the way, just so you don't bend it or anything. So at this point you can take your standpipe and shape it to fit. So we had it sitting just outside the sender unit, and you don't want it all the way at the bottom of the tank to avoid dredging up any sort of rubbish down there or draining your tank dry. In terms of the actual installation hole, we just chose this sort of flat, widest area right in the middle, making sure it's not going to clash with any of the connectors or hit anything underneath. So you can go ahead and drill your hole and get the pipe fitted. So for reinstallation back in the tank, you can just drop the sender unit back in. So again, you need to be careful that the float level measuring sort of arm is sort of pushed in without bending it or anything, and also the standpipe that you fitted is not going to catch anything now. When the sender is back in, there is an actual sort of slot that it sits into on the top of the tank. So you can see at the bottom of the sender unit there's like an arrow. This should correspond with the arrow on the fuel tank itself. So if you sort of have a little play and give it a twist and a push, you'll feel when this sits into place, and obviously you've got to push down against that spring as well. So after this, you just need to get the retaining ring back on, although we managed to break the first one, so we had to get a replacement retaining ring. Easiest way to do this we found is if you have one person putting a bit of pressure on the sending unit to keep it down and flush with a long tool or something, the other person can then concentrate on getting the thread right on the retaining ring. Also, there is a rubber washer underneath, so make sure the rubber's sat right, make sure the ring catches the threads right. Quite easy to misthread this, so just be careful. And when it is all on correctly, even and turning on nicely, you can just screw it back on tight. Probably don't need to go crazy tight, we just went pretty snug. So hopefully now you're sending units back in, so it's just a case of connecting everything up again. So I think we did the actual fuel line first, the fuel line for the heater first. There's not much clearance on this, so this was a bit tricky to push in. But again, bit of WD-40 on the black tube, and this just about pushed in okay. Got the clamps nice and tight, and then went for the rest of the connectors. So electrical connector should just push in snug. The fuel line, the green connector, the return pipe, we couldn't actually get the green plastic clip on properly anymore. It sits on about 80% of the way, but by the looks of it, this is just sort of a cover clip anyway, so it's not making any difference. The fuel line's still pretty snug. So yeah, just get all these back together. So providing everything on the fuel tank is now connected properly, you can go ahead and put the filler cap back on. Follow the procedure for reconnecting the battery. Before you start the engine, I would flick the key a few times in the ignition just to reprime the fuel lines. On the first turn you should hear a bit of a gurgle as the sort of fuel lines are filling back up. Do it a few times just to make sure there's definitely fuel in the lines, and then start the vehicle and just make sure there's no warnings or anything. Make sure the fuel tank level indicator still works fine. If that's all fine, after that just verify all the connections all the way from the fuel tank to the heater itself. For connecting the heater, you can just well, some people permanently just connect it straight into the battery. This did have a 15 amp fuse connected in line. Probably I'll have it on an actual panel switch at some point so I can actually control it. But yeah, once it's connected, you can fire that up as well. Just make sure everything works okay. It pretty much worked fine for us first time. There was a tiny bit of smoking on startup, but nowhere near the amount that I've seen on some videos. Just before you start the heater for the first time as well, you do need to prime the lines. So with this rotary controller, you did that just by holding the off button for a few seconds, and then you could hear the pump start. In the priming process, it sort of ran for maybe a couple of minutes and then stopped again, and then we just pressed the off button to reprime it again. So yeah, we could watch the fuel line and see the fuel getting all the way to the heater before we actually started it for the first time. Okay, so hopefully that's been useful. It took me a long time to dredge all this information together and sort of all the bits that I was missing for my build, so hopefully if someone else is doing this on this type of vehicle in the future, this saves them a bit of time. But yeah, good luck, and any questions, just let me know.